This is the story of Chris, a skilled African-American photographer, and his girlfriend Rose, who come from different worlds. Chris is black and Rose is white, but their love for each other is strong, unfazed by societal judgments and stereotypes. They want to take their relationship to the next level, and Rose invites Chris to spend a weekend with her family. Chris is a bit uneasy, unsure of how Rose's family will react to him. Despite Rose's reassurances that her parents are open-minded, Chris can't shake off his nerves. On their way to her family's place, Chris calls his best friend Rod, an airport security officer, to thank him for looking after his dog while he's away. With everything in place, Chris and Rose set off on their journey. When they arrive, it's clear that Rose's family is well off. Her father, Dean, is a renowned neurosurgeon, and her mother, Missy, is a successful psychiatrist. Dean warmly welcomes Chris, giving him a tour of their elegant home. During the tour, Chris notices that the house staff, Georgina, the housekeeper, and Walter, the groundskeeper, are both black, which makes him feel a bit uneasy. Sensing this, Dean explains that the housekeeper and groundskeeper were like family to his parents, and after they passed away, he couldn't bear to let them go. He assures Chris that they are more than just employees. Later, the group gathers on the porch, chatting and getting to know each other. As they talk, Rose's parents mention a house party they're hosting the next day. The conversation turns personal when Chris shares a painful memory, losing his mother in a car accident when he was just a child. Seeing the heaviness of the moment, Rose's parents quickly change the topic. Noticing signs that Chris might be a smoker, Dean suggests hypnosis therapy as a quick way to quit the habit. During the chat, Georgina serves them tea, but Chris can't help but notice her strange expression, a mix of forced happiness and hidden tension. Before Chris can dwell on it, Missy abruptly dismisses Georgina, and soon after, Rose's brother Jeremy joins them for dinner. During dinner, the mood shifts as Jeremy starts grilling Chris with questions about fighting skills, even suggesting that black people are genetically superior when it comes to physical strength. Things take a bizarre turn when Jeremy suddenly stands up at the dinner table, challenging Chris to a fight. Tension fills the room, but Rose's parents quickly step in, preventing the situation from spiraling out of control. Later, when Chris and Rose find a moment alone in her room, she vents her frustration over her family's strange and borderline racist behavior, trying to reassure Chris. That night, Chris struggles to sleep, so he heads outside for a smoke, hoping to calm his nerves. But what he encounters is far from calming. Out of nowhere, Walter, the groundskeeper, charges directly at Chris, sprinting at full speed. Chris braces himself, but Walter runs right past without a word. Turning around, Chris catches sight of Georgina inside the house, staring into a mirror and adjusting her reflection, as if she's in a trance, completely unaware of his presence. Perplexed and unsettled by these strange events, Chris heads back inside, only to find Missy sitting in a cozy therapy room, sipping tea. She offers him the chance to try her hypnosis therapy, supposedly to help him quit smoking. Before he can decide, she begins stirring her tea, and the repetitive sound of the spoon scraping against the cup seems to have a hypnotic effect on Chris. In the dimly lit room, Missy's voice takes on a chilling tone as she asks Chris deeply personal questions about his mother's death. Although Chris hesitates, the sound of the stirring compels him to speak, bringing painful memories to the surface. Soon he finds himself unable to move, trapped in his own mind. With a few words, Missy sends Chris into a nightmarish state where he feels as though he's sinking into darkness, completely powerless. She calls this terrifying place the sunken place. Chris is paralyzed, struggling to break free, but he can't escape the feeling of being trapped far below the surface of his own consciousness. Suddenly, Chris jolts awake in Rose's bed. Disoriented, he checks his phone and sees a message from his best friend, Rod. He tries to convince himself that the previous night was nothing more than a bad dream. But his phone's battery is nearly dead, so he plugs it in to charge and decides to clear his mind. With his camera in hand, Chris steps outside, hoping to capture the serene surroundings. Spotting Walter, the groundskeeper, he tries to start a friendly conversation, but as soon as they speak, Chris realizes that something is disturbingly off about Walter too. Chris notices something unsettling about Walter, the distant look in his eyes and the way he talks, like a white man from the 1950s. When Walter asks Chris if Missy's therapy worked to cure his smoking habit, It dawns on Chris that the strange hypnosis session wasn't just a dream. Disturbed by this realization, he rushes to tell Rose, who apologizes for her mother's actions. To his surprise, Chris realizes that the hypnosis actually did stop his craving for cigarettes. But he doesn't have much time to dwell on this, as Rose's family hosts their annual gathering, drawing in dozens of wealthy older white guests. As the guests arrive, Chris can't shake the feeling that something is off. Many of them stare at him, their behavior unsettlingly odd. As Chris and Rose mingle, a woman rudely asks Rose if Chris is better in bed because of his race, while an elderly couple makes offhand remarks about how black skin has become fashionable. Chris feels increasingly uncomfortable and tries to find some peace by taking photos around the estate. While exploring, he meets another black man named Logan King. But Logan, like Walter, behaves like a man out of time, speaking with an oddly formal and outdated tone. During the party, Chris also meets Jim Hudson, a blind art curator. Unlike the other guests, Jim doesn't bring up race. Instead, he admires Chris's photography and seems genuinely interested in his art. Feeling uneasy from all the strange encounters, Chris heads upstairs to clear his mind, unaware that as soon as he leaves, the party downstairs falls silent. In his room, he finds his phone charger unplugged, which deepens his suspicion. He checks the nearby rooms and catches Georgina in the hallway, leading him to suspect that she might have unplugged his phone. In need of reassurance, Chris calls his best friend Rod to share the bizarre hypnosis story. Rod jokingly suggests that white people might be using hypnosis to turn black people into sex slaves, but Chris brushes off the idea, trying to convince himself that everything is okay. Yet when he talks to Georgina, she also speaks in an unnaturally formal manner, struggling to grasp modern slang. Chris opens up to her about how being surrounded by so many white people makes him feel uneasy. Georgina's expression shifts. She looks like she wants to say something important, but instead she starts to cry. Through her tears, she insists that the Armitages treat her like family before walking away, leaving Chris even more perplexed. Back downstairs, Chris sees Dean deep in conversation with the older guests. Spotting Logan, Chris seizes the chance to snap a picture of him with his phone to send to Rod. Something about Logan seems familiar, but in his haste, Chris forgets to turn off the flash. As the camera captures the image, Logan's demeanor shifts dramatically, and he suddenly suffers a nosebleed. Logan's nosebleed quickly escalates into panic as he lunges at Chris, shouting frantically, "Get out!" The unsettling outburst shocks everyone, but Dean tries to lighten the mood by suggesting a game for the guests. Sensing Chris's discomfort, Rose suggests they take a walk to clear his mind. Meanwhile, back at the house, an unsettling scene unfolds. The Armitage family and their guests hold a secretive auction, with Chris as the prize. The highest bidder, Jim Hudson, the blind art curator. Out in the woods, Chris confides in Rose about the strange feelings he's been having ever since the hypnosis session and insists that they leave immediately. Back in his room, Chris manages to send a photo of Logan to his best friend Rod. Rod immediately recognizes the man as Andre Hayworth, someone who went missing and used to date one of their friends. As Chris shares his eerie encounter with the now transformed Andre, Rod starts to panic, warning Chris that something is seriously wrong. But before they can dig deeper, Chris's phone battery dies. Feeling an urgent need to escape, Chris tells Rose that they have to leave right away. Rose agrees and heads downstairs to grab her things. While she's gone, Chris notices the closet door left ajar and decides to take a look. Inside, he finds a stack of photographs, images of Rose with numerous black men from past relationships, including Walter and Georgina. It becomes chillingly clear that Chris is not the first black man Rose has lured into her family's home. Rose returns, claiming she's ready to leave but can't find her car keys. Chris urges her to hurry downstairs, but as they reach the foyer, they encounter the whole family waiting. Jeremy blocking the front door, Missy holding her teacup, and Dean watching with a menacing calmness. Chris pleads with Rose to find the keys, but Dean begins speaking cryptically about the brilliant white mind and its desire for a suitable vessel. Feeling trapped, Chris loses his patience and shouts for Rose to get the keys. In that tense moment, Rose drops the act, revealing that she has been part of her family's sinister plan all along. Just as Chris tries to fight back against Jeremy, Missy taps her teacup, plunging Chris into a hypnotic trance. Paralyzed, Chris can only watch as the family drags him into their basement. Back in the city, Rod becomes increasingly worried about his friend. After countless unanswered calls, he decides to investigate on his own. A quick online search reveals a missing persons report for Andre Hayworth, confirming his worst fears. Meanwhile, Chris wakes up in a dark basement, tied to a chair, struggling desperately to break free. A TV screen flickers to life in front of him, showing a recorded message from Rose's grandfather, explaining that Chris was chosen for his genetic advantages as a black man. As Chris absorbs the horrifying revelation from the TV, a video of tea being stirred begins to play, sending him back into unconsciousness. The next day, Rod grows increasingly concerned for his friend. He visits the police to report his suspicions that Chris is being held captive by a white family who abduct black individuals to turn them into sex slaves. However, the police dismiss his claims with laughter, considering his theory absurd. Meanwhile, Chris awakens to a chilling sight. John Hudson, the blind art curator, appears on the TV, calmly discussing the family's gruesome surgical procedures. It's revealed that the Armitage family has been transplanting the consciousness of aging white individuals into the bodies of young black people, granting them not only the desired physical traits, but a twisted form of immortality. John's chilling desire to take Chris's eyes. Once the procedure is complete, Chris will become a mere passenger in his own body, trapped in the haunting, sunken place. Determined to fight back, Chris quickly formulates a plan. Just as the hypnotic tea recording begins to play again, he plugs his ears with cotton stuffing from the armrest of the chair, blocking the trigger. When Jeremy comes to take him for the brain transplant, Chris seizes the moment, grabbing a lacrosse ball and striking Jeremy with it, knocking him down. With Jeremy momentarily incapacitated, Chris looks around for a weapon and finds inspiration in the mounted deer head on the wall. When Dean goes to investigate Jeremy's absence, Chris charges at him, ramming the deer's horns into Dean, causing him to bleed out on the floor. A candle tips over in the chaos, igniting the operating room and trapping Jim inside. Chris races upstairs ready to confront Missy. He knocks the teacup off the table, preventing her from using it as a hypnotic trigger. But she retaliates, stabbing his palm with a sharp object. The two engage in a fierce struggle, and in a burst of adrenaline, Chris overpowers her, stabbing her in the eye. Just as he reaches the front door, Jeremy, bloodied and enraged, catches Chris in a headlock. With quick thinking, Chris stabs him in the shin, then stomps on his skull to ensure he won't get up again. Unbeknownst to him, Rose is upstairs, blissfully unaware of the chaos, lost in her music and browsing photos of shirtless black men, plotting her next victim. Finally, Chris locates the car keys and starts the engine, desperate to escape the nightmare that has engulfed him. But as he speeds away from the house, he accidentally hits Georgina with the car. Haunted by memories of his mother's tragic hit-and-run death, Chris feels an overwhelming compulsion to help Georgina, despite the horrors he has just escaped. Chris makes the brave choice to take Georgina with him in the car. Unfortunately, the sound of the crash catches Rose's attention, and she rushes outside armed with a rifle. In a moment of shocking revelation, she discloses that Georgina and Walter are her grandparents, their brains transplanted into younger black bodies as part of the family's twisted experiments. In a fit of rage, Georgina attacks Chris, leading to a violent struggle that culminates in a devastating car crash, claiming Georgina's life. Injured and disoriented, Chris fights to escape the chaos. Just when he thinks he's out of options, Walter, under the influence of Rose's grandfather, charges at him, tackling him to the ground. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, Chris uses his camera's flash, momentarily awakening the real Walter inside his body. To Chris's surprise, he gains an unexpected ally. In a bold move, Walter seizes the rifle from Rose and shoots her in the gut before turning the gun on himself, bringing an end to the family's horrifying experiments. Though he is battered and exhausted, Chris feels no desire to kill Rose, despite everything she has put him through. Just as he contemplates the weight of his actions, the sound of sirens fills the air, and the police arrive on the scene. But to Chris's relief, it's not just any police car. It's an airport security vehicle driven by none other than his best friend Rod. Rod's timely arrival pulls Chris from the brink of despair, and together they drive away from the nightmarish scene, leaving Rose to succumb to her fate in the middle of the street. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this thrilling recap, please hit the subscribe button for more captivating stories.